What up, gang, and welcome back once again to I Like Watches. A few weeks ago, I began questioning what I was seeing and what I was saying in my reviews when it came to watches steel finishing, because it started to feel like every single watch I was seeing and reviewing had really good steel finishing, unless of course I was talking about a Timex, in which case it was really bad steel finishing. So that got me thinking, is the steel finishing on the watches that I review really that good? Am I that lucky? Or is it because perhaps I'm not comparing watches side by side? Why is it the steel finishing on the watches, the affordable watches that I generally review, why does it look really good? So what I've done is I've bought a few watches that I'd like to compare in this video to try and understand a little bit better what we can expect from different brands, different price points, what should be considered good, what is not so good. I've got a Timex, a Casio, a Seiko, a Citizen, a Grand Seiko and a San Martin to show you in this video. I've taken lots of lovely macro shots and the results are actually quite surprising. Here are the watches I will be comparing in this video. They range in price from £180 up to £3,000. The cheapest watch is this Q Timex reissue. You've then got a San Martin SN0129, a fantastic JDM Seiko, the SBTM323. You've then got the Casio Oceanus, another incredible watch. We've also got a brand new Citizen with a very new movement inside it. This has the caliber E365 inside it, so a very new retro inspired watch by Citizen. And the last watch is this Grand Seiko Quartz GMT. Stunning watch. Now, I've produced videos, reviews on all of these watches. I'll link those videos in the video description. And I'm pretty sure I was quite complimentary in those videos about the steel finishing on all of these watches. And I do still stand by what I've said in past reviews. I think because I review more affordable watches, I'm probably expecting the steel finishing to be worse than it actually is. So I'm quite often pleasantly surprised, again, unless I'm handling a Timex, although the finishing on this Timex is actually pretty good. But yeah, because I review affordable watches, I think on the whole, the steel finishing is better than I'm expecting. But it's only really when you put these watches side by side that you can actually tell the difference. And it is, like I said already, quite surprising. So the first thing I did was took some close-up shots and video footage of the brushing on the actual cases, and the cheapest watch, this Q Timex reissue, the brushing is incredibly heavy. It's really rough, really deep. On the San Martin, it's quite soft. It's a sort of satin brushing. Same with the Seiko and the Casio Oceanus. It's a little bit heavier on the Citizen, and yeah, again, a bit softer on the Grand Seiko. But actually, the brushing on all of these watches seems to be fairly nicely done. Next thing I looked at was the polishing on the cases, and yeah, there was really quite a difference there actually. The Q Timex reissue was actually quite impressive. You can see the reflection is actually quite crisp and clear. I'm not really seeing any streaking or waviness. Same for the San Martin actually. Yeah, their polished surfaces are generally pretty good, and on this San Martin it does seem to be pretty good. Nice clear reflections, no obvious signs of rushed polishing. Yeah, it looks nice and flat. The Seiko SBTM, again, the polishing looks pretty good. The reflections nice and crisp and smooth and flat. Now the Casio Oceanus, this one surprised me. The polished surfaces on this case have this sort of hazing on them look. It's really weird. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. I've tried to remove it, I've washed it, I've wiped it. That sort of fogging or haziness is on the steel. Yeah, I think you would have to actually polish that to get rid of that and make it brighter. So yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed with that Casio Oceanus, because I think their watches are known for their finishing, their steel finishing. The new Citizen was okay. It seems quite bright, but you can actually see some lines. That's evidence of streaking. That is basically when the surface was brushed, and then when it was changed to a polished finish, it was done a little bit too quickly. And yeah, it's not flat. It's sort of, well, still got evidence of the old brushing finish. And then we've got the Grand Seiko Zaratsu polished. All of their watches, I believe, Zaratsu polished. So you would expect the polished surfaces to be the brightest, the crispest, the most smooth. But actually, well, it just looks pretty average, doesn't it? Okay, well, what about where brushing meets polishing? That line, how is that on all of these watches? Because that is somewhere where a lot of brands slip up, I think. And it's one of the reasons why, on the whole, I've been very complimentary of San Martin steel finishing, because I think they focus on that line. And it is something I do tend to focus on in my reviews, because I think it is a good indicator of how much money and time and effort a brand is putting into the finishing of the steel on their watches. And the Q Timex reissue is surprisingly good. I mean, look how wobbly that line is because the brushing is so coarse, but I'm not really seeing any over brushing on that polished surface. That is the top of the case, by the way. You're looking at the sort of sides of the case which are brushed, and then that top surface is the polished ring around the crystal. And yeah, that line, albeit quite wobbly because of the coarseness of the brushing, actually looks all right. And then you've got the San Martin. Yeah, they really do nail this part of their steel finishing. Look how straight and clean and crisp that line is. I'm not seeing any overbrushing on the polished surface, and I'm not seeing any slightly more reflective sort of over polishing on the brushed surface. It's just a very clean, crisp line. And then we come to the Seiko SBTM, and it is a horror show. I mean, look at that. There's not really even a line. And I think Seiko are notorious for this. I have seen some quite expensive watches, a new King Seiko, for example, where there was a lot of overbrushing. I just think it's something they don't focus on unless a watch has Zaratsu polishing, and I think that's a real shame. Look at that. That's awful. Here's the Casio Oceanus. Again, like San Martin, super clean and crisp. A really strong, defining line. And then you've got this Citizen. This really impressed me, actually. Although the polishing on the end of the case isn't fantastic, that line is super crisp, isn't it? That's really, really good. Now, this is surprising. This is the Grand Seiko, and look at that line. It's not particularly crisp. It's a little bit wobbly. It's not as bad as the Seiko SBTM, but it's definitely not as good as the Citizen, Casio, or San Martin, is it? I was expecting it to be head and shoulders above the rest, but it isn't. Okay, what about the polishing on the bracelets? Well, again, the Q Timex impressed. Look at that reflection, super clean and flat and crisp. Yeah, that's good. Here's the San Martin. Again, yep, that's pretty good. This is the Seiko SBTM. Now, they have brushed the top surface of their bracelet, but they've got these little sort of polished facets. They're sort of hidden a little bit, so I wasn't expecting this to be the best polishing, and it isn't. It's a little bit sort of blotchy and, yeah, a little bit wobbly. And it's the same story with the Casio Oceanus. Again, it's not really a surface that's going to be sort of seen. It's not a primary surface. It's not on top of the watch, so I just don't think they've given it the sort of attention that, well, you'd want, I guess. No polished surfaces on the Citizen, so we'll go straight over to the Grand Seiko, and this is the only polished surface on the bracelet of the Grand Seiko. It's the side of the links, so again, we're not really expecting this polishing to be the best, but I think I was expecting it to be better than that. Brushing on the bracelet, well, on the Q Timex, it's, yeah, pretty good. On the San Martin, yep, it's pretty good. Now, on the Seiko, I think it's really good. Look at that, a beautiful, sort of smooth, clean satin consistent finish. I like that. Similar story with the Casio Oceanus, very nice. Here's the Citizen. Again, I think those last three watches are the best so far. What about the Grand Seiko? Well, it's just as good as the previous three, I think. Doesn't stand out, it's no better, it's just nice. Now, I know in this video I'm sort of focusing on steel finishing, but I thought I would zoom right in on the 12 o'clock applied indices on all of the dials to compare, because although they're not necessarily steel, it is a sort of polished and unpolished mix on most of these watches, and yeah, I was just curious to see how they compare. And the Q Timex is a little bit rough where the loom has been applied. That inner surface looks a little bit rough, doesn't it? And the corners on those two applied indices, not particularly crisp, and they've also been put on at different heights as well. So yeah, not the best. And then we've got the San Martin. I think this applied index is really good. The polishing, or the brightness of it anyway, really, really nice. The corners, super crisp. The inside corners where the index meets the loom, really, really straight. Yeah, that looks really good. Then you've got the Seiko SBTM. A few bits of dust and debris on those applied indices, isn't there? Which is a little bit disappointing, but they look fairly crisp. You've got those grooves, which sort of gives you that rainbow effect, which I quite like, and yeah, I mean, they look all right. Then you've got the Casio Oceanus. It looks a little bit dirty and dusty, doesn't it? But really crisp. I mean, they look like chisels. You look like you could do woodwork with those things. Again, they've got those grooves that sort of give that rainbow effect. So yeah, without the macro lens, they are impressive for sure. Then you've got the Citizen. Well, there's no polished surface, so you've just got that sort of brushed finish, and I thought there was some loom down the center, but there isn't. But yeah, all the corners look super crisp, and yeah, the brushing looks nice, so they seem to be very nicely finished. But then we come on to the Grand Seiko, and I think this is where this watch really stands head and shoulders above the rest. I mean, that applied index is incredible. I'm not seeing any dust or debris on the dial or under the crystal. It looks super clean and crisp. Again, you've got those grooves, which gives you that fairly strong sort of rainbow effect. That is seriously impressive. So what have we learned? Well, I think I've learned that there's not necessarily a direct correlation between how much you spend on a watch and how good you can expect the steel finishing to be, because that Grand Seiko costs quite a lot more than all the other watches I've shown you in this video, and I don't think the steel finishing was head and shoulders above the rest. In fact, at times, probably not as good, sometimes roughly the same. Okay, there are areas of that watch that are better than the others, but yeah, I was expecting the difference between those watches to be much greater. And I've also learned that there doesn't seem to be any consistency when looking at different watches from the same brand, because don't forget, I looked at a Q Timex reissue chronograph GMT a little while ago, and I slated that watch for terrible finishing, and actually the finishing on this Q Timex reissue was pretty good, much better than it was on that GMT chronograph. And I've also seen that with Seiko and Citizen watches in the past. Some watches of a certain value would be very nicely finished, and others of an equal value not so nicely finished. So it doesn't even look like you can go to a particular brand and be absolutely confident that you're going to get a certain level of steel finishing. I think you're just going to have to look at watches on a case-by-case basis, literally, and determine for yourself, is the steel finishing on this particular watch good enough for me? If it is, great. If it's not, then move on and look at another watch. Right, guys, I hope that was useful. It was definitely useful for me. I'm going to refer back to this video when reviewing watches in future, and hopefully my reviews will be a little bit more consistent and accurate, hopefully, especially when I'm talking about steel finishing. Right, guys, as always, massive thank you from me to you for tuning in. It's been a long one, so I'm now going to let you go. If you haven't gone already, which most of you probably have, just watching, guys.